Log 1, the origin of robots and the three rules of robotics. So now these two are the most basic things when it comes to robots, so I'm going to talk about it. The origin of the word, robot itself, and the three rules of robotics that's still being considered today. So, firstly, I'm going to talk about the origin of robots. So, the origin of robot, the word robot, is from the 18th century. So, in 1920, a Czech writer named Karl Kapitz made a story or a comedy named Rossum's Universal Robots. You probably heard it, it's pretty famous. Now, in that story, in that comedy or play, Rossum is a factory owner, and his son decides to make a robot that works, that makes repetitive work, like automation robots, that works instead of humans. So they can do labor, they can move things, move heavy things, they can do repetitive work for the factory. And now it's successful, it works, and he succeeds to make that robot in making the factory work, right? He makes it so that it works for the factory. However, later as the story goes on, the robots that Rossum's son created starts to think, right? They gained knowledge, consciousness, and everything else that requires them to actually think about what's happening. So they think that why are we following humans, right? And then they decide to attack and disobey humans. This is how the story goes. And throughout the story, we can see that the word robots were used a lot because it was introduced from that book, as I told you before. Now, the origin, the actual origin of that word robot is actually the word robota, which is a Czech word for forced labor. And now, in that word, robota, we can see what Kapitz thought of robots, like the concept of robots. He thought that robots were just a thing that works for humans, that does labor for humans so that humans don't have to work in terms of repetitive work, right? Work that requires physical activity, that requires a lot of physical activity and that could lead to death or harms. Anyway, unlike the story that Karl Kapitz wrote, there was another story from an American writer called Isaac Asimov. He wrote a lot of famous books like I, Robot and Run Around. And the book that I'm trying to tell you about today is Run Around, because Run Around was the book that introduced the three rules of robotics. And the three rules of robotics, as I basically told you in the beginning, it's a basic thing that is still being considered when making robots and when developing robots like AI these days. They're still using these three rules. They're also developing on it, but these three basic rules are still being used today. Now, I'm going to read you these three rules and end today's video. So the three rules are: a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Secondly, a robot must obey orders given by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. Third, a robot must protect its own existence as long as protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And we can see that all these laws created are reasonable and made to protect humans from robots once they gain consciousness or knowledge. That is all.